and the intellectual labor of our participants. Our experiment with creating a collaborative edition, therefore, relied upon materials over which we had a certain amount of control. If things went poorly, we knew who to call, where to go, and how we could punt. Our goal in the end was to come back to the Houghton Library with a beautiful and a complete edition of this 13th century text that the library could then reference as a digital addendum to the real-life manuscript version. Now, I want to say here that I'm talking about everything that's going on at Harvard, and I want to be very clear that we're not complaining. This is really for medievalists, really cutting edge. And so we really just, as I said, entrepreneurial and trying things out. So we're out there giving it a go. Okay. Oh, we don't want to go forward. There we go. And now, perhaps one of the first questions one might ask about this undertaking is why we thought it was a good idea in the first place. Working with the Houghton MS Lat 5, which contains sermons by the medieval theologian Conrad of Saxony, was going to be a challenge in any case. Aside of the really difficult text, there's a lot of abbreviations in this text. It's really not easy by most standards. The MS Lat 5 is not a full manuscript, but it's rather a portion of a larger codex. So perhaps lacking in the integrity and the logic that its larger version might have provided. However, the exercise of transcribing a text from its digital simulacrum, really engaging with it and getting to know the text apart from its materiality means that when the transcribers ultimately do encounter the original, they already know its contents really well, and they're therefore able to appreciate its materiality more fully. And I've done this in a couple of different classes where you introduce the digital version, and then you take students to see the actual manuscript, and it's just, they're amazed. I tell people that it's a lot like getting to know somebody that you know just on Twitter. You know their personality, but then you go and then you see sort of the real life version, and it's so much better. The close connection that we had here at Harvard also meant that setting up the project was really quite simple. We used From the Page as our transcription platform, and we could use the resources at the library to get that accomplished, which in turn alerted our library colleagues that we were what we wanted to do and our schemes and our plans. This meant that our library colleagues were aware that we ultimately wanted to contribute our work back to the library to prolong the story of this text and perhaps even to add to it quite meaningfully. Finally, we were interested in sharing with our participants a new and a really quite promising way to engage with medieval manuscripts. That's with IIIF, and that's through collaborative transcription. And we did so by involving them in this project in this very hands-on way. Now, a second question concerns what we learned about our manuscript in the library before we even did it digitally. Working with materials housed at our own institution's library meant we had a head start on unraveling the mysteries that every manuscript presents when you first encounter it. From the library's material, we knew what the manuscript contained, first of all. We knew its physical dimensions and its characteristics. We had a general sense of its date, its place of origin, and who had owned it previously. This is all good stuff to know when you're trying to figure out what's inside a manuscript. What we did not know was just how challenging this text would be, particularly in terms of how truncated it was, how fundamentally it differed from any of the published versions of the same material, and how intensely we would have to mark up what was on the screen in order to produce a version that would answer the course requirements and teach the students the fundamental skills for the class. But indeed, this is what real-life manuscript work is like. You don't really know what you're dealing with until you get into it and get down to brass tacks. But we ourselves brought important things to this project. In the first place, we brought our years of knowledge about medieval manuscripts and about paleography more generally. We also brought a workflow of collaborative transcription called the Transcription Challenge Framework that had enjoyed a great deal of success during the pandemic when many medievalists were stuck at home and had learned how to access materials that used IIIF technologies. Project participants brought their interest, both in what the text contained and how we might tackle the work together. And of course, we also put the time, the effort, and the goodwill into working together and to building a community around the text itself. So I'm going to pass it on to Sean now.
So I'm going to use this because this is just far enough away that my reading glasses will almost work. So we're just going to do it this way. I will use the reading glasses. So as you can see so far, the goals for the project were fairly straightforward, but they were also ambitious. So first, we intended to apply Laura's transcription challenge framework to a hybrid classroom environment. So a bit of creative adaptation. Second, we needed to fulfill my own pedagogical needs, which were teaching paleography students how to read and understand a relatively legible but a highly abbreviated 13th century hand, while also producing a high quality transcription of a text for which, and this is important, no modern edition exists. The only editions we have date for an incunabula, so they date from around the year 1500, and are attributed not to the actual author, but to St. Bonaventure, which poses its own interesting research problems. Third, we needed to create a network of collaborators, in this case, transcribers, who had enough knowledge of medieval handwriting to be able to read the manuscript, and enough interest, either genuine or in the case of my students, compelled to work on it for a number of days. Team members would need to communicate with each other, in this case via Slack, and share their insights, their tips, their resources, and probably just as importantly, their frustrations. And then finally, we intended to use the transcription created during this intense, actually half week of work as the basis for yet another hybrid pedagogical and scholarly endeavor, which was creating a digital edition of Houghton Manuscript Lat 5, using the skills provided with a workshop on TEI, XLST, and LaTeX led by Sarah Long from the University of Graz, which we held on campus in April 2022. So in short, our ambitions were Vitruvian, a measured and well-structured process of evaluation and construction carried out by journeymen and apprentices, leading to an elegant digital edifice created on a sturdy, reliable, and carefully tested foundation of IIIF, enabled and supported transcriptions and annotations. This edifice would occupy a prominent place within the sacred precincts of Harvardia Digitalis, accessible to anyone visiting Harvard MS Lat 5 via the marble portals of IIIF. As is usually the case, however, life did not imitate art. Our plans did not go completely awry. The transcription challenge framework by this point was well developed and had been beta and even gamma tested. It simply required uploading a IIIF manifest to an instantiation of From the Page, dividing the folios to be transcribed among the various participants, setting up a structure to monitor the work as it was completed and review what the team had done along the way, and then finally having editorial sign-off. The structure actually worked well, and the participants did their job, I have to say, really admirably. But we had, it turns out, bitten off more than we could chew. This was due in part to the very tight time frame of the project. In order to keep my own syllabus intact, remember this was part of a classroom exercise, we only had 4 days to complete the transcription work. In turn, producing a complete, thoroughly vetted transcription required a much larger team than we were able to muster. My course had half as many students as we had anticipated. Thank you, Harvard Shopping Week, the core group for this endeavor, and it proved difficult to attract sufficient numbers of interested and able transcribers to fill the gap. As a result, by the end of Sunday, which is when we were supposed to finish this thing, Sunday at midnight, it actually turned out to be about Monday at 2 a.m., we had transcribed about 60% of the Houghton manuscript, a number that grew a little bit, but not enough in the following weeks due to extra work by students and colleagues, and most notably Laura and myself. As a result, our fourth, and in many ways our most important desideratum, which was the creation of a complete digital edition of the manuscript text, turned out to be impossible, despite the successful implementation of Dr. Lang's 2-day TEI XLST workshop at Harvard. In short, we found ourselves betwixt and between. We were stuck halfway between the IIIF resources from where we began the journey and the quality, high value scholarly transformation of those resources that we expected to arrive at. But even if we'd been able to accomplish our goals, some major questions remained unasked, or at least unresolved, regarding the so-called virtuous circle that we had confidently intended to close. And these are questions that I'm now going to hand over the floor to my colleague from Houghton Library, Sarah Powell.
So we have this fantastic, albeit incomplete transcription based on a manuscript held at Houghton Library. It's a collaborative student-centered project that was only possible because we digitized the manuscript. So as a curator and a librarian, what's my responsibility, if any, to the preservation or long-term maintenance of this product? So if someone undertook similar work in the reading room using the physical book, we would not record this type of work. We would be unlikely to even know about it unless the researcher were to get in touch with us regarding a publication of an edition, and we would likely purchase a copy of this edition for the reference collection. Or we might simply include a note or a copy of an article where applicable in the curatorial file. And this is what the curatorials files look like in our stacks, and on the right is the MS-Lat5 file. And these are not browsable by the public, and their contents aren't listed anywhere, not even a finding aid. So they really are internal files. They're usually accessible by researchers in the know, which means those who know to ask for them, which isn't very many people. And back in the age of this physical curatorial file, it was easy for curators, librarians, and archivists to keep track of projects such as this group transcription, because most, if not all, manuscripts required permission to view. In addition, in order to obtain publication quality images, a researcher would have to ask the library for reproductions and publishing permissions. So with the relaxation of access restrictions and freely and widely available digital reproductions, which are greatly facilitated by IIIF, we no longer have that same sort of control over materials in the library as we did before. And anyone can and should use our materials for scholarly and creative projects without asking for permission. In recent years, a public Zotero library has served as a place to keep track of works that cite Houghton manuscripts. And the Zotero library replicates information that's found in the physical curatorial files, as well as on the library's old website. And it's linked from our website, it's a screenshot there. But I don't know how many people actually use it or see it, which is a separate issue about tracking traffic to and the reach of our web presence. So if no one sees it, so what? Sean and Laura made the reasonable assumption that Houghton Library might be invested in the long-term preservation of their project. After all, it's hosted on we use the libraries from the page account, and we use the digital images that we created. As they've noted, this type of labor-intensive transcription, even if incomplete, could be quite useful for future researchers trying to decipher the scribe's handwriting, and especially abbreviations, which are sometimes very mind-bogglingly unclear to the modern reader. But the library can't do everything either. So what should we do in cases like this to facilitate knowledge sharing? What is our role in completing the virtuous circle? Apart from linking in Zotero, one answer might be that Harvard's digital scholarship repository. Maybe users could upload XML files there where they stand a greater chance of preservation and maybe discoverability, but I don't know, than in from the page. So this case study highlights myriad theoretical issues that must be grappled with more so than purely technological issues. So would including human-generated transcripts versus OCR in this ecosystem mask the labor that went into their creation? If our IIIF specifications did allow for transcription in the manifest metadata, which I'm told is forthcoming, who, if anyone, would be responsible for reviewing and updating this? How do we facilitate access to this type of work while also respecting privacy and students' intellectual property rights? And if multiple transcriptions exist of a particular work, whose transcription do we privilege? And I don't think we want metadata to become a locus for scholarly debate. So I don't know the answers to these questions. And part of the issue here is that the libraries at Harvard are really organizationally complex and decentralized. So it can be difficult for a newish staff member such as myself to understand the technological landscape. Although I know that colleagues in IT and other departments are actively grappling with these sorts of issues already. So I hope we can discuss further in the Q&A and in future conversations. And I'll go back to Sean for our conclusion.
So basically, we'd like to close with what we described here as wants and needs. I like to call them, wouldn't it be cool? And so what came out of this project is we realized that they all could have expectations. We have things we wanted, and we never necessarily enunciated them. We're going to get to this in a second, because I think what ultimately was true. We thought this was all going to be about tech. Turns out it's about people. So the innovator, which I called for, one who created the transcription challenge framework, thought, wouldn't it be cool if this framework I created could be adapted for pedagogical purposes and students could use it to learn things in a new way? Wouldn't it be great if I could use this for new and exciting things? The guy teaching the class, that was me, said, wouldn't it be cool if my students could apply what they learned to an actual manuscript, share their insights and experience, and create something useful, tangible at the end of it, using visible things for it created. And the librarian, Sarah, said, wouldn't it be cool if this project led to stuff I could actually use, and that I could rely on, as opposed to just being, hey, look at this cool thing you made. It's the equivalent of that picture we showed you, the house. Wouldn't it be cool if there were norms and protocols that I could share with people or Sean, so that the work they do could be used by the library and integrated into holdings? Wouldn't that be cool? Of course, the answer is sure, of course it would be cool. So we found ourselves, the return trip, right? The closing the circle, we found it was pretty rocky. And as I said, that it turned out it wasn't a technical problem. It wasn't necessarily a problem with IIIF on the page or anything. It was a problem about relationships and about how to form them and how to think about them. So some of the big questions that came out for us is, what do those relationships look like? How are they articulated? How do you negotiate them? And this is the question, I think, of two things. One is scholarly communication, and other is workflows and institutions, which are, of course, not always the same thing. And in fact, sometimes they're very radically different from one another. And then what are the benefits to each participant, as well as what are the responsibilities to each participant, which is something that Sarah's already alluded to. And so to wrap things up, what are the questions we're left with? We're left with, I think, 5 big ones. One, how do you explain as a scholar what you're doing to a repository for students' IIIF materials you're working? How do you communicate? Second, should the repository of the library, should we care? This is a really important question. Should they give a crap about this? As Sarah said, this is an interesting tough question with IIIF, right? Because now, used to be you'd have to go and ask permission to look at a physical thing. Now anybody can look at it and do things with it. That's great. But does that put an onus on the holding institution? And if the library does care, is it their responsibility to preserve what we've done? And if it's not their responsibility, whose responsibility is it? Where should things like what we're making go? Is there an infrastructure for this? Are we going to create one? What's it going to look like? What should various participants in these processes contribute? What can we expect from the other participants? How do we communicate those expectations? How do we communicate what we expect other people to do and what we expect to do in return? And then finally, how do we make that return trip easier to map out and easier to track? So those are the questions we come up with. As I said, this is a strange paper for a IIIF conference. And it's really not about IIIF. It's not IIIF, but it's about talking to each other about using IIIF. So if we have a little bit of time, I guess we do have a few minutes. We appreciate your answers to some of this and maybe the questions you have in return. So thank you very much.
Answers?
What do you got?
Solve our
What do you got?
problems.
Thank you. I really appreciated this kind of meta paper. And I would just want to say that the questions on the slide are what I deal, that's my job. And so what I want to say to the two faculty is I really want to say on behalf of all of the digital humanities and digital collections librarians, thank you for not inventing your own metadata standard. And not inventing your own version of TEI. And, I think a lot of these questions is, should people care whose responsibility is that, we do care. And I guess my question comes back to you is that when digital libraries have set up they have set up metadata standards and standards for text encoding, and how do we effectively communicate back to scholars and faculty that we want to be your partners in publishing this, and that that we care about, and that digital libraries are also real libraries that, like the physical manuscript repositories, do want to publish and contribute to scholarship and support the digital scholarship of faculty. And I guess to bring it all back to why we're here
this IIIF conference is what is it about, and maybe this is a question to the audience, what does IIIF offer as a standard to get scholars engaged in ways that maybe other standards and other communities of practice haven't?
So
I know that's a lot.
I just want to throw one thing out. I talked about, we had a meeting about this very question. It seems that's one thing that I.
They're recording it.
Oh, do we need it anyway? Okay. So one thing I've often thought about is with IIIF as a delivery system and as a protocol, and the ease of use, the affordances that it brings with it. What it's meant, I think, in some interesting ways, is it means that libraries have doubled in size. Everything gets digitized. You now have a dual collection. You exist in two modalities. And so you have two completely, well, not completely different, they overlap a lot, but you have two different kinds of user communities who are research communities working with your material, producing things with the material in very different modalities. And I don't think institutions, well, I think the librarians will all agree with me, institutions don't see this. And so the question that I've raised with Sarah is, okay, let's say, isn't it great that there's people doing all this great scholarship with the IIIF stuff, with the digital version of your library? Where's the librarians for that? The library staff remains the size it is. Now you have a library staff that is doing double the work, it seems. And I think this is one of the problems that I think for a lot of scholars have is, you know, it seems to me you guys are being expected to do double the work or maybe triple the work, because there's this entire new world of scholarship being produced. And it used to be you just make a Xerox of the article somebody wrote and stick it in a file. But now you're being asked to house it, to make it available, to interact with it, to engage it with the digital. And I'm curious, I mean, do you feel that way?
Well, we were doing all those other things anyway, but they were just in different modalities. So we're not really doing double the work. I mean, and in some cases, like if institutions are smart, they're hiring double the people, but we all know that, of course, unless I don't know if there's any provosts in the room, most of the time they're not. But, you know, I think, you know, I guess it's interesting that you're like, you were Xeroxing it and just sticking in a file, but there's a lot of other processes. What I think has changed about the digital is that I think a lot of scholars and students are being exposed to processes about libraries and about technical services and about metadata that were hidden in the old days when, you know, you asked at the desk for that manuscript. I think that people are now seeing, and hopefully they're seeing all the labor and expertise that goes into that. So I think it's, if you finally are seeing that we are doing double the work, then we have succeeded.
Oh, I always knew.
I hope we'll get double the pay.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Answers?
I don't provide answers anymore. But I think as a software engineer, I have a tendency, and some of my colleagues here probably do as well, to find ways to use technology to avoid communication, or at least to make those wheels happen faster. So some of these questions make me ask during this process. We've talked about things like automatically notifying IIIF systems about new annotations on resources and things like that. During this process, was there a point where you were like, oh, darn, I really wish I had this technology handling this for me in some way?
What I can say about that is we just wish there were a pathway that we knew. We know that it can happen. We know that it probably should happen. I mean, you know, Sean and I talked about this text itself, which, you know, there's what, one book written about this guy. I mean, no one knows anything about, I mean, whatever we did was probably twice as much as that's already been done for this, you know, so it's valuable what we've done. And we would love to have a pathway back to letting people know about it. And so there just wasn't a pathway. I mean, I could imagine that there were probably lots of things I could have clicked to get me back to, you know, to doing that, but I didn't know where that pathway was, and I didn't really know who to ask.
Maybe one more question or response.
it seems to me that really what you need is you need to actually all the stakeholders, meaning all the libraries, the digital collections need to sit down and determine if this is something that is important. Is it important to put the resources towards? You're talking about hardware, software, engineers, and there needs to be a commitment. It needs to be important in order to fund. Without the funding, it will just wither away. It's fantastic that it's taking place as part of a course. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the sharing of the skills, with people going through the exercise, but is it important to the institution for it to live beyond the end of the term? That is a political decision, as you have rightly pointed out, that needs to be decided by the stakeholders that also control the purse strings.
Should they do?
I don't know the
It's-
answer to that. I think we probably will say, yeah, could, will they? It's a different question. What does it mean to care? Probably the biggest question.
I think this is great if folks, this is a bigger thing. Let's do this at the reception over drinks and hash this all out. I think for now, let's say thanks. Yeah. All right, and our last presentation for today, to wrap things up, we have Debra Cashion and Ben Bakelaar talking about creating a Scholars Manifest, incorporating user contributed annotations and metadata.
Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ben Bakelaar. I'm a digital architect and I'm presenting on the Manuscript project out of St. Louis University. We're wrapping up our third year, so maybe you've seen some of the prior presentations. And to start things off, I'm just going to do an introductory video from Debra Cashion, who's the faculty member and PI of the project.
Hi, my name is Debra Cashion, and I'm Digital Humanities Librarian at St. Louis University, where I also direct the Manuscript project for the Vatican Film Library. The foundation of this project is a digital library for online access to the VFL's collection of Vatican manuscripts on microfilm made during the 1950s using the Kodak silver gelatin process. The original master negatives are digitized and converted to IIIF compatible images made accessible through the Mirador viewer and searchable by discovery metadata that we create at SLU. This component of the project is built in Omeka S and represents a straightforward digital catalog, which, like most online library catalogs, presumes users as consumers rather than producers of information. Two additional components of the Manuscript project, however, acknowledge scholars as information producers and provide tools for users to create their own data about manuscripts. One of these components we call the Scholars Workbench, which is a digital workspace built with a simple annotation server developed by Glenn Robson, IIIF technical coordinator, has worked as a consultant on the Manuscript project. The SAS enables registered users to annotate manuscripts with IIIF manifests and save those annotations to their own online accounts. With the application of Mirador annotation tools, users can build their own digital editions of manuscripts for purposes of research or teaching, and all annotations can be tagged and embedded with hyperlinks to other online resources. The Scholars Workbench allows users to share or export any annotated manuscript as a new information object represented by a JSON manifest that identifies the scholar who produced it. The Scholars Workbench does not include a cataloging function, however. To fill that need, we developed a second additional component to Manuscript called the Community Catalog, an interactive user-friendly interface that allows anyone to catalog a manuscript using structured metadata, linked to authority files, and controlled vocabularies. To make cataloging more accessible to the inexperienced, the metadata template is intellectually organized according to context, carrier, and content, but saves as a flat file that can be exported as either a CSV file or a JSON manifest. The second option is what we are presenting here today. It requires that you start with a manifest of a manuscript already digitized in IIIF. This would most likely come from an online institutional collection, but it could originate with a manifest you yourself created somewhere, such as the Bodleian Manifest Editor or Fragmentarium. When you begin a record in the community catalog, there's an option to add the manifest of the manuscript you want to catalog. After completing this and some other information, you then build your own catalog record following the process outlined in the metadata template, adding links to authority files and controlled vocabularies wherever possible. When saved, the metadata you create replaces the existing metadata and renames the manifest as a product of your scholarship. This new Scholars Manifest can then be opened in the Scholars Workbench, where you can continue work on the manuscript using the Mirador annotation tools. Your work is saved to your account in the AWS cloud, but at any time can also be backed up to your hard drive using the share function, which produces a manifest URL that can be opened in any IIIF environment. When you're finished cataloging, editing, and annotating, you will have created a critical, scholarly, and digital edition of the manuscript you started with, except it now can be published as your own work, either online in its entirety or as a simple link included as a footnote in a print publication. All of this happens without changing the original manifest, institutional or otherwise, in any way. Manuscriptor users can work in either the community catalog or the Scholars Workbench spaces separately. For example, you or your students may want to edit or annotate a manuscript in Scholars Workbench for which the institutional collection has already provided sufficient cataloging metadata. Or collection managers may see the community catalog as a useful tool for cataloging their own collections or for teaching cataloging to graduate students. But all of us who work in manuscript studies know how great the need is for discovery metadata for uncatalogued manuscripts. Instead of relying on institutions to face this challenge alone, we as scholars can help address the issue by cataloging the manuscripts we study and making those scholar-produced records available in our own articles, books, and online publications. This kind of cataloging is not the same as crowdsourcing, which asks users to altruistically give away their work. Instead, it's an opportunity to expand our scholarly product by creating catalog records for the manuscripts we study and giving access to those records through the publication of a simple URL. I will leave the rest of this presentation to my colleague, Ben Bakelaar, Manuscript Systems Architect, who will walk you through the technical processes involved to produce a Scholars Manifest by first creating a record in the community catalog. I hope you will find all these new tools not just technically interesting, but useful in your own work, whether it be research, teaching, collections management, or digital development. In other words, in your work as producers rather than consumers of digital information. Thank you.
Okay, so that is Debra's vision. I was relieved to see there were some other works in progress right now. So we are also a work in progress. I'm not quite finished, but I'm going to demonstrate kind of the concept. Okay, so starting from the beginning, what we're working with here in terms of IIIF is displaying descriptive information. How can we enable scholars to produce the information and annotating the objects, which there are many examples of, but not so many examples of producing the metadata into a manifest, although the digital audio manifest editor I'm very excited about. So our tooling is that we have a data manager in the back end, an internal tool, which we put our metadata in and we use that to create the manifest. Omega S is what delivers the search and discovery interface, as well as the IIIF manifest. It doesn't produce it, but it just links to it. What we're talking about today are these two tools, Community Catalog and Scholars Workbench. So what can a scholar create? Just to give a little visual example, right? On the left, structured metadata in the community catalog. And that's actually that's a screenshot from an older version, so it doesn't actually look like that right now, but just gives you an idea. And annotations. And how do we bring them together into a single information object? So the community catalog will allow users to work on and create structured metadata for any manuscript using the 60-field Metascript to manuscript template. Sorry, we're guilty of inventing our own metadata standard. But Deborah deemed it absolutely necessary. So immediately, I like to jump as a person who's tuned into UX, I like to jump right to the end and think, okay, well, this is what we're trying. What is it going to look like? How is it going to look different than the manifest that we're starting with, right? And what are our options anyway for displaying this new information? So we started off with an exploration of what are the API properties that are available, kind of like a technical review. If we're generating structured metadata, where should we put it? Where does it fit in the presentation? And so loosely or closely, I pulled out these properties from the presentation API. See also homepage, accompanying canvas, and render. And I looked at the see also property, and as you can see, it's pretty clear that it's for machine readable metadata. I think though, I don't know about your experience, in the wild, I usually see it linking to like an HTML page, which is like the kind of the folder for the object. We thought, well, this is structured metadata, so what would it look like if we put it into a see also link? And that's really all you get. It's just this tiny little thing halfway down the scroll, right? Nobody's going to see it. So this is a UX issue for our vision of a scholar's manifest. Our primary goal is presentation, being human readable, not discovery, machine readable. And the way the viewers display this information, right, it's kind of almost invisible to the user. How likely is it that they're going to find it? So we moved on to a second iteration where we thought, okay, well, if we have this goal of presenting the scholar's work and contributions, what if we took the original manifest and then inserted some metadata into it, right, into a derivative copy? And so this is one view of what we came up with, where we had modified certain elements. I'll do a little bit of a zoom there, magic zoom. So the label, right, for the manifest is one opportunity to change something about the manifest and make it more about the scholar's work. The thing under the label, where it says version of, right, the description, I think. And then inserting I actually came up with the idea of inserting a new metadata element that's actually a single element, but with an HTML block representing all of the values that the scholar provided through the creation tool. And so these are the properties that we were looking at. And incidentally, the manifest itself, I don't think I'd ever read the definition of manifest in the presentation property. And so I really tuned into the fact that it's talking about any intellectual work or works embodied within that object. And so thinking about, well, there's this object, this manuscript that's represented by a IIIF manifest. Is it okay to make a new copy of it? And in the case of it being a new intellectual work, I guess the answer is yes, right? So we modified the label, or thought about modifying the label, the description, which I couldn't find in the 3.0 spec, I guess it changed, as well as attribution. Okay, so that's good to know. We're still on 2.1. And then working with the metadata itself. But as soon as I showed this to Deborah, despite her big vision, instantly it was a scholarly conversation. So how exactly are we going to modify these fields in a sort of formulaic way that would work across multiple collections, even though ours is the target collection? And then the kind of, let's say, standard concerns about copying and versions and duplicate records, which might be raised by various stakeholders and constituents. And also, since this is a 60 field metadata template, how are we going to display all 60 fields? They're not all going to get filled out most of the time, but they could. And so our current iteration, I'm not going to say our final, is thinking about a new object. So we finally realized that we should allow the scholar to create a globally unique object stored in our interactive tool, the community catalog. And so if we just generate a magic, unique ID inside our tool, that can identify this work and be associated with the metadata that the scholar produces. And in that case, the scholar becomes a publisher of their own information object in terms of the metadata. We imagine, or we're thinking about retaining a see also link to the original information object, but we definitely want to incorporate the image sequence of that source, since the annotations would, of course, need to work with the images. And we assume it's a reusable IIIF object, not a rights restricted one. So working with the same properties, but in a new manifest, I'll give you a poor man's example of kind of how it flows. So we have a tool that has a form, and the form has fields in it. And so if we collect these initial fields, name, email, institution, and most importantly, a project or work title, along with an optional IIIF manifest, and we give it a unique record ID. And then this is an example of what the structured metadata might look like as you filled out the form. And so you entered these values into. So what we can do then is take that data forward, and we can label the manifest with the project or work title. We can use the description perhaps to reference the scholar so that it's right up top, right? So we're leveraging, obviously it's very Mirador centric, but assuming that these properties are generally visible immediately at the top of the viewer. We also have the rights panel where we can use the attribution or in the case of 3.0, some other equivalent of that. And we can use the related links to store different references to the similar objects. Actually, the metadata template allows for adding contextually related other objects, as well as the source. And so this is the current state we're in right here, where I prototyped a manifest that incorporates this user-generated data and is displaying the values, each in their own metadata element. Because we're collecting pearls, right, with linked data authorities, I actually have some questions for the group about what else we can do other than hyperlink it, but for now it's just hyperlink there, since HTML is allowed in the values. And so you could construct a sort of view for your class or your whatever the purpose of your work is, right? And this all comes from one manifest, right? Which is a presumably permanent URL, right? That you could use for publication. So once you produce this, we have our images and our scholarly produced metadata. You can put it into our second tool, because we couldn't like build this into simple annotation server. So you can load the community catalog record. And so just as a sort of comparison, down here is the source manifest, right, from our collection and how it looks. And then there from the community catalog, waving hands because it doesn't actually do all that stuff yet. And so you can see the difference, right? It's pretty clear difference. It's not likely that anyone would get confused by which record is sort of which, or at least that's our intention. So then you can go ahead and load and start annotating. I'm not a medievalist, so that is my best attempt at an annotation written by the hand of Boccaccio, who is the patron in the metadata. And what do you get at the end? Well, in order for it to become a sort of scholarly digital edition, you basically have to publish it, right, and share it. And so this function we built in, right, where you can share this manifest right from inside the software. You get the annotations kind of linked into the manifest. And then you have this final product, which if somebody were to put in the time, right, to do the cataloging, to fill out the metadata template, and then spend, I don't know, if it's days or weeks annotating, right? If any of you have seen the thematic pathways site from the Vatican that can't remember his name, helped produce out of Stanford, right? There's like rich annotations there. And so I think that's the same kind of work that Debra imagines a scholar could produce. And it might look something like this, where you have your annotations on the left, you can see them in the middle, you have your scholarly produced metadata on the right. And so just to kind of rewind, starting with the original manuscript up on the top left, we plug it into the community catalog where we create structured metadata, which we combine with the source images from that source manifest. And then that becomes the manifest, which we then load into Scholar's Workbench, where we create the annotations, create yet another derivative manifest. And that becomes, by the act of publishing and sharing it, it becomes this Scholar's Manifest. So I think I went a little quick because I didn't do a live demo, but that's what we got. And I'd welcome any comments or feedback if you've seen any similar projects or tools, if you have any ideas about cool things we can do with the linked data element. I prepared speaking notes and I totally forgot to use them, so I just.
Questions?
Are there any scholars in the room? Laura?
So I'm intrigued by I'm wondering, have you thought about, so the final so the so-called edition, the digital thing that comes out of this that's citable?
Yeah.
Because it has, I guess, a DOI or some kind of identifier.
Yeah, you could put some wrapper around it, right?
Yeah. Do you envision perhaps, I'm wondering, because I'm thinking about our project. So if you let's say you created a digital edition of a text like we were doing,
right,
using XMSL or something, we're doing a LaTeX edition. It's a digital standalone digital edition. But this seems like an interesting adjunct to that you could do this as because one of the problems with digital editions is producing digital editions that work well as editions that you can just read along with the images of the manuscripts.
Yeah.
From the page does that, but it doesn't do it particularly. It's hard to do it well, and it's hard to make it work really well. You can.
Right.
I'm wondering about this would be a way to sort of work around that by having, this is where the images live and all the stuff that goes behind your edition. It's almost like the back end or the the critical notes.
Yeah,
You could then link to from your digital edition and say, if you want to see the manuscript, here's where you go. And this is the stuff we use to make it. So they could kind of stand in relationship to one another, sort of as aids to one another.
well, you could have a see also link to the transcription
Wherever it
view or
lives,
whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could even, obviously, you could build the transcription in here, but that's a little bit awkward probably. So, yeah, you absolutely could. And presumably, right, this would be kind of the front door to the transcriptions rather than, unless you were directly.
Or the
sharing.
edition could be the front door of this.
Could
What I
be.
mean, you could have a link to this that says, you know, as you cite it
Right,
as an additional publication.
right. So whatever viewpoint you take about which one is the primary, right? It's, as long as they're interlinked, it's, whoever's using this resource can find what they need. Yeah.
There is a romance, I guess, to having the manifest as a thing that's like the digital book. But I'm thinking back to a presentation I saw Jeff Witt give at one of these where he was supplementing table of contents, or he's trying to create metadata for something.
Yeah.
And in a situation like this, you have an annotation page collection that is the thing that you are completely making new. Did you have a conversation, or is there a debate, or is there a particular reason why you kind of cloned all of the things from the manifest instead of just publishing the annotation page collection as an item and saying this supplements this annotates this manifest that could then be rendered the same way?
Well, do you mean the images or the metadata?
The metadata is what you're making new,
Yeah.
right? And the annotations. So
Right.
Instead of supplementing the original manifest, you've created a new one and then changed the label. And it's clear that it's from that it's derivative.
Right.
But a lot of the machinery in the manifest doesn't change.
Well, I think the goal here, right, is to have something that is able to be annotated, right? So you could just take the source manifest, right? And you could annotate it in Scholar's Workbench or Annotate or anything. And export from there, right? And at that point, you have the source manifest metadata with the source manifest images and your annotations, right? And that's a first order derivative or whatever. Whereas here, the only difference, right, is that we inserted changing the metadata since it's a new cataloging record. But leaving out the images, is that kind of like your question is like, should we just leave the images out? Because then it wouldn't be annotatable. Like, how would it be viewed in a viewer, in a document viewer, right?
You make a reference to the original. Oh. Right. So what I guess and this doesn't need to be drawn out. I'm happy to discuss it, but the idea being that you've created your new item and you say, I'm annotating this other manifest.
Mhm.
So your final product isn't a manifest. It's annotations. And then to render it, you render the manifest and supplement it with the annotations.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what that would look like.
I could maybe answer that as well. So when we were looking at doing this addition to the simple annotation server, initially we did have there were separate products. You could download the annotation list. But all of the viewers, particularly Mirador, the only way that it will show annotations is if they're linked from the manifest. So the only way that we could kind of show the work that was done was by creating this derivative manifest. And it kind of relates to your point that it would be interesting if Mirador could go somewhere else to find supplementing material to a manifest that's already there. But it
If the
seems,
viewer supported that, right? Then there would be no need.
That was the plugin that Jeff was presenting.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
Well, we
But-
knew Jeff
yeah.
would have a problem with this, and we were hoping.
So I think Jeff is demonstrating this kind of notifications technology, which is kind of notifying an institution when you've kind of done a transcription. But it really doesn't solve all of the other problems that you demonstrated in your presentation about are you going to accept it? Are you going to preserve it? So the technology is there and it does fall under I think the discovery group. But we're just not sure if there's enough community interest to kind of take it forward.
Yeah, I think, this puts the power in the scholar's hand, right? And as a producer, just like making your own CD-ROMs and stuff and all these tools, right, that are disruptive. So if the viewer would do the work in a way that, you know, hypertextually linked everything together, that would be a nicer solution for sure. But it is all about the viewing experience, being able to see it all there in one screen. I think that's really the goal of this. Scholars Manifest is just the container for the experience, right? So from the scholar's perspective, this is great.
All right, thanks, Ben.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Thank you all. That's it for today. We've had a lot of great stuff. The last piece of information is just that we are having the reception starting in about a half an hour. I think they just need a few minutes to get set up, so walk slowly. And the Seaver quad, Rashmi is gonna explain how to get there.
So when you leave, you'll go between the two buildings. You'll have Widener on your right, and I think it's Weld Hall at the freshman dorm straight ahead. Go between them. You'll turn right. You'll now have Widener on your right still. You'll have the Memorial Church, sorry, on your left, and straight across is a big red building. That's Seaver. Go around it. That's where the reception will be. So it's really not that far. Yeah, it's like Robinson, Seaver, and Emerson. Yeah. If you've hit the Harvard Art Museums, you've gone too far, go back across the street. Look, yeah, put Seaver Hall in Google Maps, that'll get you there, but you have to go to the back of the building. So you'll also, I mean, I guess I have to take some stuff to my office, but I'll eventually be there. I'll like wander the yard and look for people too, so.